What's up, guys? I'm Norb.
And I'm Mike.
And we are the Watchmen.
The men who watch.
If it's on a screen, we're watching it, talking about it, and sharing our thoughts about it with you.
Today we are going to review our top 5 best superhero films of all time. And we agreed in advance these would be superhero films where the hero wore some type of costume.
Yes.
Just to be specific.
Most of them do, but yes, we want to make sure for those few exceptions, that we stuck with the costumed ones. So before we get into our lists, just want to say thank you to all of you who are watching us on YouTube. Please continue to support us by liking this video, subscribing, and hitting that notification bell. And for those of you listening on the podcast channel, thank you so much. We appreciate your support. And yeah, continue following our show because everything we're doing here is for your entertainment. So we hope you like what we're doing, and we hope you'll like today's show. It's going to be fun to see how many. I have a feeling there's going to be at least one, maybe a couple on our list, but it's always a little bit of a surprise to find out, what we have on our list. So, you ready to kick this thing off?
Yeah, and I'm expecting, as far as entertainment, to have a possible argument with you on a couple of the choices I've made. So we'll see how this comes out, because I'm expecting you to not agree.
Well, I'm sure you'll disagree with some of mine too, but you'll see. It's all subjective. Yeah. We all have an opinion here. So,
and as always, there are so many great superhero movies made. It is impossible to list them all. So in my case, I've tried to pick 5 that I think possibly might be something you haven't seen, or I think it has an important place in history as to why it deserves to be in my top 5. But there are going to be plenty that it's easy to say that's a great movie. But in my opinion, I have to pick 5, and I'm going to pick them for very specific reasons.
Well, for me,
I don't know about you.
I picked my 5 really just on, for the most part, ones that I just found the most entertaining, or just was a really good movie as far as a cinematic production and its impact. But the bottom line is I wanted something to be something that stood out for me in some form at the time that it came out. And so there's a touch of nostalgia in there, but I think most people would probably have a few of these on their list as well. So I didn't go too strange on things. I think I'm relatively appeals to much of the popular vote out there, but we shall see. We shall see.
We shall see. All right. I will lead it off with my number 5, and I am 100% positive this movie is not on your list, and I actually don't think, Norb, I don't think you possibly think this is a great movie, but I do. And there's someone out there named Wayne who is right there with me on this one. But this movie is called Mystery Men from 1999. Champion City already has a superhero, the appropriately named Captain Amazing. But that doesn't deter the city's 7 quirky amateur crime fighters who use the captain's capture at the hands of a villain by the name of Casanova Frankenstein as motivation to prove themselves. The only problem is that their strange powers, silverware hurling, bowling, shovel skills, incompetent invisibility, and deadly flatulence aren't doing them any favors. So right there, that should be enough to tell you this was a comedy. And I laughed so hard during this movie. It was so funny. It was so different, so clever. It made the everyday, it's about the other guys. Most superhero movies are about the superheroes. These are the other guys. You've got the Blue Raja, played by Hank Azaria. You've got the Bowler, played by Janine Garofalo. Now, what is I should add a little bit more. What does the Blue Raja do? Well, he can throw forks at people. Okay, what does the Bowler do? Well, she's got her dead dad's skull in her bowling ball, and she throws the bowling ball at bad guys. Then you've got the Shoveler, played by William H. Macy. He shovels well. He shovels very well. And that's his job, is to shovel. And then you've got the Invisible Boy, played by Kel Mitchell. Well, he can turn invisible, but only when no one's looking.
Right.
And then you've got the Spleen, played by Paul Rubens, who everyone knows as Pee Wee Herman. And his power is farting. He can just smoke you out of a situation with his stink. And then you've got Mr. Furious, who is the leader of the group, played by Ben Stiller. And what is Mr. Furious's power? He just gets really mad. Yeah. He just gets angry. But that's just, he gets angry. And then there's Sphinx, played by Wes Studi. I actually, Sphinx kind of is, he's just there to try to keep everybody together. And I would bet a lot of you have not seen this movie. It's one of those that just, it came and went, and sadly it was a box office bomb if you just look at the amount of money it made. It had a $68 million budget, and it only made about $33 million. So it was a loss on Hollywood standards, but an undiscovered gem, in my opinion. There are so many great samples from this movie. One of my favorites that Wayne and I always like to do is we always like to go, "Aw, dang!" And that was the last word that Captain Amazing uttered before he died, is he said, "Aw, dang." Meaning, oops, I goofed up and now I'm dead. And one of the best scenes is where the mystery men try to attack Casanova Frankenstein in his car, and they unleash all their powers. So Mr. Furious gets just angry, and he tries to rip the Mercedes-Benz logo off the front of the car. That's about all he can do. And then he tries to scratch his fingernails on the car. The spleen farts in the car, and they basically then just run away because they really can't do anything. But what's great is they believe in themselves and they believe in what they can do, and that's what makes it so endearing and so funny. And so this movie is really about how they discover themselves, and at the end, maybe they do have some powers after all. So in a nutshell, that is Mystery Men and why it deserves to be in my top 5. Norb, is there anything you'd like to say about Mystery Men?
I'm trying to remember this because I know I saw this movie and I thought I saw it with the guys. Did we not see this movie together?
I saw it with Wayne and Jim.
I feel like I saw this movie, yet I don't have a lot of memories from it. So I know I've seen it, but it's just one of those movies that, I thought it was all right, and then I've just sort of forgotten about it since. So I don't really have a strong feeling as to whether it was good or bad. I remember I remember it being funny and stuff, but it just didn't leave that much of an impact on me. So I've just put it out as to one of those many, okay, I saw it and moving along now. So, I just don't, it's just like, I remember Ben Stiller. That was, I remember he was in it. That was all I remembered from the show, but I really don't remember any details. So I'm glad that, that it had a special impact on you and that you laughed a lot at it, but I can't really add much to it. I'm not gonna disagree because I didn't hate the movie. Just don't have much memory of it at all. So that's nice.
Well, there's one, and a lot of people don't know this, but Michael Bay, who's a famous director who did most of the Transformer movies,
blows up a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Michael Bay decided he wanted to feel like what it would be to be an extra. So he decided to be an extra in Mystery Men. And there's a scene where Casanova Frankenstein is putting together his group of bad guys, and he recruits the fraternity of Phi Beta Gamma, and all the frat boys are around this table drinking beer, and one of them is Michael Bay, and he's in a frat boy sweater, and he's like, let's all unite. And Michael Bay says, hey Casanova, can we bring the brewskis? And Casanova says, of course you can bring the brewskis. And that was Michael Bay's little cameo in that movie of just his one line, but he was interviewed later. Why did you do that? And he said, I just wanted to feel like what it would be like to be an extra. So, because I'm usually the director, so it was just
And he directed the film too? He was the director and he made his own cameo?
No, I actually shouldn't say cameo. That's incorrect. He did not direct the movie. It was directed by Kinka Usher. So I guess I should not say cameo as in the director made a cameo. It's more just that Michael Bay, who's a famous director, was uncredited in the movie.
Oh, okay. Well, that's still a cameo. I think that's still a cameo.
Okay. I guess nowadays I think of cameo as, let's say cameo because you're in your own film, but...
Oh, that was like, that sort of reminds me, I think George Lucas made a surprising cameo in Beverly Hills Cop 3, which was like one of the dumbest movies ever made. And I remember it takes place in like Great America, and there's a scene where George Lucas is in there. I was like, what the hell is he doing in here in this stupid movie? But yeah, sometimes people make cameos in other movies. And
well, I talked a lot about Doug Jones, how much I respect Doug Jones in in other films, and he has a small little part in Mystery Men, where at one point they have a recruiting session. So they're recruiting new superheroes, and he is one of the people being interviewed, and he says, "I am Pencil Neck." And then there's a boy next to me, and he says, "And I am Son of Pencil Neck." And he says, "We erase crime."
That's pretty good.
They didn't get hired. But it was clever writing.
Pretty funny.
So again, that little fun little joke there sums up what Mystery Men is all about to me and why I like it so much. So
I didn't remember Ben Stiller being. I do remember Ben Stiller being pretty funny. That all he did was just get mad. Yep. He had no power. He just lose his temper.
He'd just get mad. They'd always have a shot of him going, and then that was it. Then he'd just try to scratch his fingernails on the car or hit something, and then he'd run away.
That was the time. Ben Stiller was pretty top of his game then, right? When that came out. I remember Ben Stiller. There was a point where Ben Stiller was kind of really flying high in the 90s. Not so much now, but I think, what year was that out? He was 90-something?
99.
99. So maybe he was on the tail end. 'Cause I remember he really was big in the 90s and then started to kind of taper off a little bit once got a little further into the 2000s. But, yep. Ben Stiller. Be funny. All right. So starting the list for me, I went with Spider-Man Homecoming, which came out in 2017. Thrilled by his experience with the Avengers, young Peter Parker, played by Tom Holland, returns home to live with his Aunt May, played by Marissa Tomei. Under the watchful eye of mentor Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr., Parker starts to embrace his newfound identity as Spider-Man. He also tries to return to his normal daily routine, distracted by thoughts of proving himself to be more than just a friendly neighborhood superhero. Peter must soon put his powers to the test when the evil Vulture, Michael Keaton, emerges to threaten everything that he holds dear. And there's been a lot of Marvel movies, obviously, and I think for why this one makes the list for me, one, we've seen, to this point, we'd seen a lot of Spider-Man movies, characters, iterations. Prior to that, we had Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man. And I think this one definitely has resonated the most. A lot of it, I know, is because my kids really like Tom Holland as Spider-Man. Obviously, he's the cute young one in the group. But I just like the feel of this movie. It had great humor throughout, which is, I think, most of the Avengers now, good humor is kind of a staple thing. But this one, I really enjoyed it. I was laughing out loud at a lot of different moments. He has this Asian sidekick pal who they did a good job of not offending Asians like myself while making him kind of a goofball sidekick. So I enjoyed laughing at him and not feeling like I'm being exploited or anything like that. So that's always a good bonus. And in this movie, Michael Keaton is awesome as the villain. And just the scene that really stands out to me was the scene where he's in the car with Peter Parker and driving up to his house. And you feel that tension. He's basically kind of, each one knows who each other is, but yet there's this sort of underlying, you have to keep it on the down low, but underneath everybody knows what's going on. And it was such a good tense scene that was just, I remember Michael Keaton just stood out so well in this movie. And so all those things combined, and the fact that because they did such a great job with his character and in this film, later on, my kids, had that emotional experience. So when Peter Parker, Spider-Man, actually dies in the Avenger Infinity War, they're so devastated because he was such a great character, and to see him wither away into ashes was so shockingly disappointing. But he made that kind of impact, especially on my kids. So Spider-Man Homecoming 2017 was definitely one on my good rewatchability on my book.
I like this movie. It's not in my top 5, but I enjoyed it. I agree. Michael Keaton was really great, and they did a good job. I think part of maybe why subconsciously there's a slight strike is that I've constantly listened to my friend Byron complain about these movies, and Byron is Spider-Man is his number one
favorite,
a superhero, and he's read many of the comic books, and he has always complained about how in the movie universe they decided to make Iron Man Spider-Man's mentor. And that has just bugged him. But he also says he understands why they do it because
they got to tie in the
and Robert Downey Jr. is such a big draw to the movies because he has made Iron Man such a great character. And so you get Robert Downey Jr. in the movie, it's going to sell. But it doesn't bother me as much as him. I just think I definitely listen to those complaints.
Well, and I think I'm furthest thing away from a comic book expert. So you talk to anybody who knows these characters in and out and followed the comic series, I'm sure there's going to be plenty for them to complain about when it comes to any motion picture depiction, because they usually change certain things. And it'd be the same way how I was very critical when it comes to Star Wars stuff, because when you really know the history and the character background things, and when somebody changes something pretty extreme like that, I would probably be offended too. So the lack of knowledge on my side helps me to have this sort of general, I thought it was great, and not have to worry about them breaking certain, personality traits or background things. So my ignorance ignorance is bliss for me. The fact that I don't know all the details. Otherwise, I would probably hate a lot more of these superhero movies because I would find some fault with them. So I'm glad I don't have to know that information, because it would probably make it a lot less enjoyable to try to watch them and try to forget those things that would really bug me. So I understand the spot, but I don't have that problem. So that won't weigh in on my list here.
Well, and there's been so many Spider-Man movies over the years, and you can get into, who played the best Spider-Man? And I really did like Tom Holland as his portrayal of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. My second would easily be Tobey Maguire. A lot of people can't stand Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man. I liked him a lot. Andrew Garfield would definitely be at the bottom of my list as far as in the last 9 Spider-Man films, but I don't know if you'd share agreement with me on that order.
I'd go with that, the first 2. I can't remember the other guy you're talking about.
There you go.
So exactly. I would go Holland and then Maguire. I didn't not like Maguire. In fact, when they rebooted again and it was somebody else, I was like, what? Tobey was fine. Why are we changing it up again? But I
can tell you right now why I think you don't remember Andrew Garfield is because when Andrew Garfield played Spider-Man, they tried to make him a tortured soul. This guy who's just got all this agony inside because of, his friendships are falling apart. They made him a tortured soul versus the newest Peter Parker, Tom Holland. Tom Holland, he plays more of a likable, typical high school kid. And I think that's the big difference.
Yeah, he's just kind of innocent and positive and just trying to do fun things in his life and gets very excited. Yeah. So it adds that refreshing, youthful, hopeful feel to it. And that's why when he dies, it's so tragic, because he's such a nice kid. Why would you do that?
But just don't even get the comic book people started on why they decided to make Aunt May hot in Spider-Man Homecoming versus old Aunt May like the comic books have always portrayed her, and even the other movies.
Yeah, actually.
I'm sure you liked that they made Aunt May hot, because she's hot. It's nice to look at her.
And then, exactly. I was like, well, this is different, because you're expecting old maid with blonde or the gray hair, someone in their 70s. And then Marissa Tomei is, she's enough that they have a little, flirtation between her and Robert Downey Jr., So
even that's just more like the comic book people are like, Iron Man hitting on Aunt May.
Can you imagine if Aunt May was the old Aunt May and Robert Downey Jr. is hitting off with her? Like, hey, baby, let's get it on. That would have been a little bit odd. But again, it didn't bother me. She's okay. That's different. But I'll go with it. I'll roll with it.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to my number 4. I have definitely a few things to say about this movie. Again, this movie made me laugh. And it'd be interesting to see if this is on your list, Norb, but this is Ant-Man.
Yes! The first one.
Of course, the first one. Yes.
Yes. We're in lockstep on this one. Woo-hoo.
So, forced out of his own company by former protege Darren Cross, Dr. Hank Pym recruits the talents of Scott Lang, a master thief just released from prison. Lang becomes Ant-Man, trained by Pym and armed with a suit that allows him to shrink in size, possess superhuman strength, and control an army of ants. The miniature hero must use his new skills to prevent Cross, also known as Yellow Jacket, from perfecting the same technology and using it as a weapon for evil. This was directed by Peyton Reed and stars Paul Rudd as Scott Lang and Ant-Man, Evangeline Lilly as Hope Van Dyne, Corey Stoll as Darren Cross, and of course Michael Douglas as Dr. Hank Pym, and then a good supporting role as Michael Pena playing Lewis. But Ant-Man is a movie I wasn't excited about. I saw the trailer and I was like, small Ant-Man, ants. But boy, was I wrong. Again, I think everyone talks about how much they love the Marvel movies because they found ways to get clever humor in them. I think Ant-Man is the pinnacle of that success. Ant-Man had the best humor of all of them, in my opinion, and that's what made Ant-Man so great. And I went on a tirade last week about my irritation of product placement in a football film. This is probably one of the few films where there was some product placement, but it didn't bother me. The famous saying, Baskin Robbins always finds out.
Oh, yeah, that's a great scene.
Yeah, he works at Baskin Robbins, and then his boss says, "I found out that you've been in jail," and he says, "How did you know?" He says, "Baskin Robbins always finds out." And even his friends later said, "Yeah, Baskin Robbins always finds out." And of course, that's product placement, but it didn't bother me. And maybe it's because it was clever and it was humorous. And that made it work. It wasn't just this serious, the Dick's Sporting Goods halftime show.
Right. Well, it kind of makes fun of itself without being demeaning to the company. So, it's laughable because it's an ice cream company. They're not going to have some high level security, but the thought that Baskin Robbins has this high level, analysis of their personnel is just crazy, which is what makes it funnier.
Yeah. And I'll toss to you, Nor, because this is obviously on your list, but the best thing about Ant-Man, and I wish there was a term for this, and I would love to come up with a term for this lip sync trick they did, but Norb, why don't you explain why that was so great and what they did?
Yeah, I knew you would probably have this movie in your list, and I was going to talk about it too. So Michael Pena, I think it's Pena with the swirly with the end. Michael Pena is a great, funny character in the show, and what makes his role stands out is that every time he tells a story, they go into it with this sort of musical style with these bongo and this bass kind of fun little soundtrack. But he tells a story and they reenact the scene that he's describing. And as the characters interact with each other, their mouths are lip syncing to Michael Pena's telling of the story. So it's Michael Pena, and he puts his own little Hispanic sort of, "Hey, what's going on?" So it's his voice, but the characters are saying it with his voice being heard, but in the style that he tells the story. So it's very unique in that you get to keep Michael Pena's flair, but the characters are imitating it. So obviously the story really didn't happen that way, but they make it happen that way because it's based on his storytelling. So they do that probably 3-4 times in the movie?
I believe it's just twice.
Is it just twice? It feels like it was a lot more.
Maybe they do it once during the movie and once at the end.
Gosh, it felt like there's a lot more. Anyway, but yeah, I guess they did it later on in the other movie. I'm thinking about probably the whole
I think you're thinking
saga.
about Ant-Man 2.
Yeah, he does it again. But yeah, he does it twice in the show and once at the end. So that has such a... we love that technique so much that in our production company that we do for companies, we decided to integrate that into one of the shows we were doing and did the same exact technique. And we've done it a couple times, really. So it's one that not only made us laugh, but made enough of an impact that we decided to incorporate that style into our own business operation in a way that we use that technique to make something a little more funnier.
It's such a funny way to tell a story. It's so clever.
Yeah. I don't know if there is a term for that. I don't know what it is, but it's a lip synced storytelling with flair. But yes, that was definitely one of the highlights. But there were plenty more other things that just made that show so funny. It's just like I can't even remember. There's so many good punchlines and moments that you can't even track it all. You'd have multiple pages of spreadsheets to track all the funny scenes in there that are just great. And Paul Rudd is a fantastic guy to play that role. So yeah,
one scene I'll bring up to mind, and again, part of what makes Ant-Man is he becomes small, and so he becomes tiny, and everything around him is gigantic. So it's that Honey, I Shrunk the Kids feel. But towards the climactic ending, he's battling on this train set, a Thomas the Train set. And I remember seeing it with my youngest son, who plays with a lot of Thomas stuff. It was fun for him to see this huge Thomas the Train barreling down on the bad guy. It was great. And that's one scene I remember in particular.
Then the humor to that is when they're in close on the micro action, everything's big and the explosions are big, and then they'll pull out to real life when it's a toy. It just kind of goes. Yep. So everything's like. And then you see the reality, and it's just little toy falls over, clink. Yep. Just that occasional pullback to show what it would really be like is pretty hilarious. But I did see a note that to get in shape for the role, that Rudd said that he worked out with trainers and he cut alcohol and fried food and carbs out of his diet. And he said that basically he just did the Chris Pratt approach, which was, I didn't eat anything for a year. And his philosophy was, Chris Pratt, was eliminate anything fun for a year and then you can play a hero.
That's good.
So, because you always hear these, actors who lose weight and get into shape for movies, and sometimes it's really extreme. And otherwise it's like, man, how do they do that? But, I guess if you're going to be a superhero in tight spandex and stuff, well, I guess I might be motivated too to probably cut a donut or two out of my diet as well. So pretty cool. A great movie. Very great movie.
So which was that on your list?
That was number 4 for me also.
Number 4. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So we go to 3 for you then.
I guess we just move on to number 3. Well, that was convenient.
Yep.
Okay, number 3, and this is where I think we're going to possibly differ, but number 3 is The Dark Knight by Christopher Nolan. Is that on your list?
Oh, it's on my list, but I have that at the top of my list.
I figured it would probably be at the top of your list. That's what I was guessing.
I'm surprised it's that far down, but okay. At least it's on the list, which I would have expected.
So, The Dark Knight, with the help of allies Lieutenant Jim Gordon and DA Harvey Dent, Batman has been able to keep a tight lid on crime in Gotham City. But when a vile young criminal calling himself the Joker suddenly throws the town into chaos, the Caped Crusader begins to tread a fine line between heroism and vigilantism. Directed by Christopher Nolan, this is a great film. From the get-go, I remember seeing it for the first time. It's one of those that I was pulled in from the beginning. And Christopher Nolan likes to shoot in IMAX, and so he'll shoot certain scenes in IMAX, which is a much larger format than typical 35 millimeter film. So if you see it in IMAX, for those special scenes, the resolution takes a huge jump up, and the image goes from a 235 one aspect ratio, and it gets much, much wider, more towards 16 by 9. So he's really into that. That's Christopher Nolan's IMAX Norb is really what most DPs today would just shoot in an 8K red camera. But Christopher Nolan is very traditional. He does not like shooting digital. So
he's a purist. He tries to he sticks with film even now in a digital age. He's very much into purism of
so IMAX
cinema.
Is his 8K, so to speak. But we can go back and forth on this, but I like this movie very much. I think Heath Ledger played a terrific Joker, and it has some very, very memorable moments, especially the part where the semi-truck flips over and it's that big wide shot where the camera's just slowly moving on the ground. And they talked a lot about, they shot that semi-truck flip with, I think, 15 cameras. And they, as a last thought, let's just put this one on the ground, slowly moving towards it as just a throwaway option. And they liked it so much, they just went with that and just scrapped all the others, because there was something ominous about when that big truck just flipped over at you and you're, of course, low on the ground. And I always remembered that. It's probably my favorite shot in the movie.
Yeah, so obviously I like this movie a lot. The Dark Knight is number 1 on my list, so spoil there. my best film's already being revealed right now. But I'm not the only one who liked it. It was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, and it won Best Sound Editing and Best Supporting Actor. And I think really when you talk about The Dark Knight, the standout of all the things really is the performance by Heath Ledger. I don't know if it's Heath. I always wonder, is it Heath Ledger or Heath Ledger? But we'll just call him Heath. Heath reinvented that Joker role. And after, we'd seen it so done in such a unique way by Jack Nicholson, which we loved, back in the late 80s when the first Batman came out with Michael Keaton, Heath Ledger just transformed it to something different. And what they said, the way he prepared for that role is that he lived alone in a hotel room for a month, working on the character, his posture, his voice, and the personality. And he kept a diary where he recorded his thoughts as the Joker and his feelings about the character. So he really didn't just pull it out and come up with something that day. He really did kind of isolate himself to really create that character. And you always appreciate people who do that kind of thing, because whether it's a physical change in their body or a mental thing to really prepare for a role. Obviously, it paid off because he got rewarded with a posthumous Academy Award, an Oscar, and he makes the film. I don't think this film would have been nearly as good if you did not have that performance by him in there. So, ended up grossing like $1 billion worldwide. It was the highest grossing movie of 2008. And, I think you can't speak enough about how his role, that character, defines what The Dark Knight is all about. So that scene where, what does he do with the pencil with the guy?
He says, I'm going to show you a magic trick.
Magic trick.
I'm going to make this pencil disappear.
That is
gone. I don't know what happened.
But yeah, he just had just such a great performance in that show. So it's very unforgettable.
My other favorite part of that movie was where he blew up the hospital, which was actually a abandoned Brock's candy plant. So it was a real former building that was not being used. So they blew up a real building, and that was a pretty cool explosion.
Yeah, it was. It was pretty cool. But yeah. Okay, so number 3 on your list, number 1 for me. And I'm really interested to see what gets number 2 and number 1. So I guess let's hear your number 2.
Well, no, actually, we're at your number 3.
Oh, I guess we have to go to my number 3. That's right. So, okay. So to number 3 for me. So I had to go back in time a little bit, and I'm talking about the original Superman, the motion picture of 1978. So just before the destruction of the planet Krypton, scientist Jor-El, played by Marlon Brando, sends his infant son Kal-El on a spaceship to Earth. Raised by kindly farmers Jonathan Glenn Ford and Martha Kent, Phyllis Thaxter, young Clark, played by Christopher Reeve, discovers the source of his superhuman powers and moves to Metropolis to fight evil. As Superman, he battles the villainous Lex Luthor, played by Gene Hackman, while as a novice reporter Clark Kent, he attempts to woo co-worker Lois Lane, played by Margot Kidder. And this one's probably the oddball out of my list because most of the other movies I had are relatively recent. I had to go back to this one just because Superman, while you watch it now and it's definitely campy and has that 70s, look to it, or as my daughter would say, Vanessa would say, oh, it's from the olden days. You have to accept that's just at the time the way things were made. But so much about this movie has had such an impact for me in terms of my relation to superheroes. It became the superhero movie for most of my life until the modern superhero era kind of kicked in. And I think it was a combination of Christopher Reeve. I didn't know who he was, and obviously got to know him here on this show. But the music of Superman, I think maybe is the biggest lasting component of that, because I don't know if I'll ever hear a better you think of superhero themes, and it's hard to say in the history of movie music that there is a better theme than the Superman theme. And that maybe by itself transcends this movie, because without the Superman music of John Williams, I don't know if Superman is as good of a movie that I remember it to be. And John Williams has that effect on so many of our favorite films, from the Indiana Jones series to Star Wars. Without his touch, they might be half the movies that they are, but he creates the lasting memory. And in fact, on our trips every year, when we go with our guys' trips for our annual get-togethers, what do? We play the Superman theme. We belt it out
great
ourselves while singing to it. It's got that kind of lasting impact. Such a good song. Such a good theme. I have other things I want to kind of mention here, but let me toss to you a little bit because I want you to kind of chime in a little bit on your memories of Superman before I bring up a couple interesting factoids about the original Superman movie.
Well, the original Superman with Christopher Reeve is not on my list, but it is a great film, just not in my top 5. But I don't remember the first time I saw it. I can't remember if I even saw it at the theater when it came out. I just can't remember. I've seen it many times since then. And I've read a lot and researched a lot about it. I know about, there's such a story behind the making of this movie because of the independent financing from the Salkind family, who Alexander Salkind was just a tough, difficult person, hard-nosed, pile-driving businessman who wanted to make this movie to make money. And he said that's why they got Marlon Brando, because Salkind wanted the big name. And that is the funniest thing about this movie is Marlon Brando and Christopher Reeve. And Marlon Brando's in like 10 minutes of the movie.
Well, he's in the beginning, and then he makes some appearances in a,
10 minutes of the movie.
Spiritual form later. But nonetheless, I mean, just to give you an example, the Marlon Brando, he had very specific details of what he was willing to do. He was given a $3.7 million salary and 11.75% of the profits, gross profits from the movie.
Yeah, not the net profits. The gross
I think
profits.
it added up to $19 million, and he only worked for 12 days on the set. Now, $19 million, that's a lot now. Back then, we're talking 77, 78. And he only had to work for 12 days, and he refused to memorize his lines. So they had to have cue cards, a la Saturday Night Live, to feed him his lines. So he was putting minimal effort into this. He knew his name was the draw, and he milked that to the bank and then some. So meanwhile, you got Christopher Reeve, a newbie on the movie. He got paid $250,000 to do both movies, since they shot Superman 1 and 2 at the same time. So that's just to give you a little bit of, relative sense. But yeah, 12 days, and you got all that money. But you got to pay the star, right?
Yeah. So, that is as a kid, the name Marlon Brando meant nothing to me. That was clearly for the parents or the adults in our generation.
Well, Godfather had just...
We were not seeing Godfather when we were 12.
Weren't, yeah, it meant nothing to us. Yeah.
But yet that was for me.
That was the draw. But I'm like you. I didn't see this in the theater. I saw it on television, I believe, years later. Yeah. So, it was definitely, I didn't get to be part of that initial exposure when it first came out. But a couple of other little things on here. So Richard Donner, who was, who'd directed the Lethal Weapon series and a bunch of other movies, he was the one who got hired to direct it. They wanted to talk to Spielberg, Lucas, all the big time names, but he's the one that came out to do it. Got paid $1 million to do both number 1 and number 2. And he actually shot 75% of number 2. But because of the aforementioned battle that the producers, the Salkinds, were having with Donner, they got to a point where they just hated each other. And eventually what they did is they released Superman 2, but they took Donner's name off of it and they gave it to Richard Lester, who was like this sort of go-between who kind of came in and became sort of like a fill-in director. And they reshot just enough so that they could take Donner's name off of it and give Lester the credit. Mm-hmm. But it's terrible because, most of that movie was... Yeah, and most of that movie was already done. They just changed enough so they could take his name out of it. Just terrible. But, the Christopher Reeve, apparently when they first auditioned him, they thought he was too young, too skinny. So Dave Prowse, who played Darth Vader in Star Wars, put him on a fitness workout regimen and bulked him up from 188 pounds to 212 because they wanted to put him in a muscle suit, but he didn't want to do it. So he did it the real way and just worked out and got big enough for the show. And they were considering these other people to play Superman. They were looking at James Caan, Christopher Walken, Nick Nolte, John Voight, and even Charles Bronson were all considered for Superman. I think it would be funny if Christopher Walken was Superman. I'm here in the name of justice, truth, and the American way.
Needs more cowbell.
Anyway, pretty pretty funny. But yeah, a lot of history on that. A lot of documentaries that have been done on the history of Superman 1 and 2 and the controversy that lied there. But nonetheless, the impact of superhero movies, I mean, that one was so huge come off the bat that early. And it wasn't for a long time before other great superhero movies came later on the heels of Superman. So that's why that one is my number 3.
I'm actually surprised. I was not going to say it to not steal your thunder, but I'm surprised you haven't mentioned Gene Hackman.
Did I say Gene Hackman?
No.
Oh, when I mentioned Lex Luthor?
Well, just talk
in the beginning,
about him, though.
Oh, yeah, you're right. As far as his contribution. That's true. And I barely talked about Lois Lane either, Margot Kidder. I mean, there's so much. I got so much on the behind the scenes stuff. But yeah, Gene Hackman. Of course, he was established by then.
Yeah,
he was one of the more higher paid, actors on the show. But he's a great Gene Hackman. I mean, he's the great Gene Hackman playing what has become he's the best Lex Luthor in my mind, even to date. They've modernized the role and had other guys play it in these new Superman movies, but I still think when I think of Lex Luthor, I think of Gene Hackman for sure.
All right. Well, my number 2.
Let's hear it.
I know this isn't on your list, but you and I actually did see this together. Oh. My number 2 is Hellboy. From 2004. Okay. At the end of World War II, the Nazis attempt to open a portal to a paranormal dimension in order to defeat the Allies, but are only able to summon a baby demon who is rescued by Allied forces and dubbed Hellboy. 60 years later, Hellboy serves as an agent in the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense, where he, aided by Abe Sapien, a merman with psychic powers, and Liz Sherman, a woman with pyrokinesis, protects America against dark forces. We saw this in the theater, and there's a story in itself in our experience seeing this at the theater. I'll save that for a minute. But this movie was directed by Guillermo del Toro, and I am a big fan of Guillermo del Toro. He made this movie great. I think without him, this movie would have been the disaster that the latest Hellboy they made was, which I didn't even see because I read it was so bad. At some point, I'll probably take a look at it, but it's hard because it was a terrible reviewed and liked film. But Guillermo, he gave Hellboy heart, and that was, of course, through the help of Ron Perlman, who is a wonderful actor who I have intense respect for because he's willing to wear these very uncomfortable suits and prosthetics beyond what most people will do. And Ron made Hellboy, he gave him a personality that, in a way, there was a lot of humor, subtle humor. As we learned, Hellboy, he likes cats and he likes nachos. And there's even a part where they say, after they say at one point, you'll get some nachos, he goes, oh, nachos. And only Ron Perlman could make the word nachos so funny and entertaining and have it have such brevity like a Shakespearean play. And I've talked in the past about Doug Jones playing Abe Sapien, and also my as I grew to like Doug Jones, how in Hellboy 2, I liked the fact that Doug Jones voiced Abe Sapien, but in the first Hellboy, I got used to David Hyde Pierce's English accent voice of Abe. What I also read in my research, Norb, that gives me a great respect for David Hyde Pierce is that when Hellboy came out, David Hyde Pierce refused to take credit, perform press tours, or attend the premiere out of respect for Doug Jones. How classy is that? That is a class act.
That's cool.
Because a lot of actors, they won't say it, but they like being the center of attention. It's part of what makes them an actor. And for David Hyde Pierce to be humble about wanting the credit to go to the guy who wore the suit, the guy who worked hard and had to do those intense days of performance in a suit. Huge respect for David Hyde Pierce for making that decision. But so you and I saw this together, Norb, and I'll tell the story briefly, but be interesting to hear your memory of it. But we went and saw this at the Montlake 9 Cinema in North Seattle, and we saw it on opening. It's sadly gone. We saw it on opening night, and I remember I talked to you into going. I said, "Hey, we should go see this. I think this is going to be good." So we saw it with our friend Dino, and that was during probably the end of the era where movies were still shown from film reels in the theater. It was during that transition to digital. So as anyone who has grown up seeing films in the theater, you get used to that little flashy dot in the corner that is a symbol for the next projector to play the next reel. So there's a little cut and the next reel starts playing. Well, somehow 3 minutes of reel 3 was missing from the movie.
Oh, yeah.
And so we ended up missing 3 important minutes of the film. So it cut from one part to where all of a sudden he's fighting these monsters. And I remember there was a gasp in the crowd and everyone knew something was wrong. Something happened. Right. And so after the movie, there's like a riot. There's a big crowd in the lobby and everybody is mad. Basically mad. And the theater people are standing in the front. They're all whispering amongst each other. They don't know what to do. And finally, one of them says, we're going to give you all free passes to come back. And then they posted a notice saying, this reel is missing 3 minutes. If you agree to see this movie, you accept the fact you're going to miss this part of the movie, which I thought was amazing. They couldn't even get it replaced that fast. But that in itself made for a memorable experience of us seeing that. Had you forgotten about that until?
I'd forgotten about that. I remember it now that you brought it up, but I do remember that feeling of, it's not very often when you get that sort of something going wrong in a movie theater.
Yeah.
And there's a handful of times. I remember seeing Terminator 2. There's that part where the Terminator first shows up and they're at the hospital and the liquid Terminator guy comes out and then they rush to the elevator and he starts firing. The liquid guy starts firing at it and I think Schwarzenegger's blocking the bullets. Right at that moment of the firing, the film negative burnt up in the projector. So it looked like an effect for a second because it looked like, bam, bam, bam. And then everything just sort of melts and becomes white. And we quickly realized, oh, wait a minute. I think the film just melted and they had to stop for like 10 minutes to get it all fixed and all that. So that was one that I'd never seen that happen again. But the timing of that was perfect and the way it happened in the middle of a gunfight scene. But that reminded me of that where, in the middle of this scene, you're all ready to keep going with this film and all of a sudden just everything's wrong. It's like, whoa, you're just mad. You're like, wait, stop. Are they going to fix this? And then you're sort of taken out because everyone's looking around and, are they going to fix this thing? And then you realize they're not. So you have to try to get back into the moment and catch up to where you are. Yeah, that was very weird. I remember leaving on that and we all wanted some kind of repercussions and I guess they did the best they could. But that was I forgot all about that memory. Weird.
Yep. But I'm a big fan of Guillermo del Toro's films. Yeah. He has a way of taking a subject that could be really ruined and turning it into something beautiful. He did the same thing with Pacific Rim, a movie you're like, oh, it's two mechs fighting each other against monsters. We've seen that before, but then you see Pacific Rim and you realize this is something special. He gave it heart. And he's had his way with doing that with movies. So when he makes a movie, I'll see it. So Hellboy deserves the right place as my number 2.
Okay. That was not on my list. But I guess to my number 2, I should say I did enjoy Hellboy too, and it's been a while. I only saw it the one time, so maybe a month. Maybe I saw it again with my kids years ago. But I'll have to take a look at it again. I've forgotten a lot of the little jokes and things like that, like the thing with the cats and the nachos. Those, I don't remember all those specifics, but I do remember thinking, I did enjoy that, and it was a shame that they did go down the path to where the last one was just a disaster. So I'd have to watch number 1 again.
One of the funniest little humor moments in Hellboy is where the head of the government is on the news and he says, look, he looks at the camera and says, look, I'm going to tell you right now, I want you to listen very carefully. He said, there is no Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense. And then they cut to this building and the title comes on and says Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense. In movies, they're always titling things. So it was the perfect little humorous cut, all in a cut.
Right.
And it's just one of the many little moments I loved in that movie.
All right, so I'm going to go to my number 2, and this is the last on my list since I already revealed my number 1 earlier. So my number 2, which probably is not too much of a surprise, is Iron Man, the first one, 2008. I say it because it's like, big whoop. But it really is you look back and for a lot of it is of what followed after that. You think of Iron Man, and he is really the first movie that launched the Avengers saga. It is the first movie that you're supposed to watch when you watch all of the movies. And it's hard to believe, I forgot that movie came out the same year as Dark Knight. It doesn't feel like they were from the same time, but they were. They were both 2008. And that's how I think the whole Avengers world is sort of, you kind of lose track of time because they are so connected and there's so many of those movies. But you forget that Iron Man came out 12 years ago. Yeah, it's a long time ago. But for those of you who've been living under a rock somewhere, the synopsis of Iron Man is: a billionaire industrialist and genius inventor, Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., is conducting weapons tests overseas, but terrorists kidnap him to force him to build a devastating weapon. Instead, he builds an armored suit and upends his captors. Returning to America, Stark refines the suit and uses it to combat crime and terrorism. And so I think what was great about this, obviously this started the whole Marvel saga and relaunched Robert Downey Jr.'s career into the stardom level. He had been still kind of recovering from his image with substance abuse, and he had been in a lot of movies, but he just hadn't really quite, I think, propelled himself back up. I don't think anybody saw him propelling himself up to the top of the A-list chain. And so they kind of had to take a chance on putting him in the role. But I've always liked Robert Downey Jr. I haven't seen all his films, but I do remember movies like Chances Are and what's that other movie that he did where he actually plays a very true-to-life character. This guy who gets down on his luck and dies of drug overdose. Shoot, I forgot the name. Anyway, but I think what's cool about it is just, that started the whole comedic aspect. It really brought Robert Downey Jr.'s, comedic acting performance level showcase in the perfect movie to get the franchise going. And I just like looking at the fact that, now he's kind of regarded as the senior member. And of course, is now no longer with the saga. But when he first started, he made $500,000 to be in the first film. And since then, this role has completely changed his life financially for sure, because after that, he went on to make $50 million for the first Avengers movie, $80 million for the second one, $10 million for a few scenes in Spider-Man, and then he made like $75 million plus from Avengers Endgame. He's one of the few guys, I think, because of his pull and the scope of his character from the beginning, where he got participation points in the profits for this movie. And clearly this is not just reinvented his career, but just put him on the map as one of the highest paid actors of all time now with the Avengers franchise. But that first movie was great, and it was I just have good memories of very funny scenes of him. You buy into the fact that he's really creating this thing. They're showing him in his lab, failing multiple times as he's trying to create the technology for it, and all that stuff was just very fun. You didn't realize how much fun a superhero movie could be, and he kind of started that trend of funnier is better instead of just numb-minding action, which somehow DC never quite figured out that formula. But that's a whole discussion for another note. So Mike, I know Iron Man, nothing really surprising there, but I know you like this movie.
I did. Yeah, I'm not surprised to see you pick it. It's important for sure. Not my top 5, but I liked it, and I never knew who Iron Man was until I saw the movie. So it was that in itself. When you think, hey, there's a movie out called Iron Man. Who's that? Okay. I
think I'd seen drawings of it, and I think Dino might have probably revealed him at some point or another, but he was not one of those ones that were shown much in any television animated stuff when we were younger. So we had very limited exposure to Iron Man, which maybe was partially why it was fresh and new then, because we hadn't seen him. It wasn't like Spider-Man or Superman where we've seen him a million times. He was somebody who was fresh face in the superhero world as far as us non-familiar ones from the comic world are concerned.
Yep. Jeff Bridges was good in that movie too.
Jeff Bridges was good. He was good in that movie too.
Yep. He had that friendly smile, smirky smile, but clearly he's up to something. played that very well. So, yeah, I don't have much else to say about it, though. I do remember how much you and I both despised Iron Man 3. We saw that together, and that was such a... It's funny, when you think of all the Marvel films, Iron Man 3 is the one that nobody...
Is that the one where he had all kinds of suits flying everywhere?
Yeah, it was overload.
Was painful.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just took it too far.
They did.
You know, it's kind of like you take a good gimmick and you multiply it. You know, it's like you can have, when you can change your face and have the old fat mask, oh, it was him. But you do it too many times and it's just, okay, this is too much. And it was too many too many flying suits. It took away from the fact that it made him special when there was just one. I got a whole bunch of them. I was like, well, why even bother being in there? So, it's too bad. They did end. Took a sour note at the end, but the first one was great.
Well, we are at my number one, sounds like. So, Norb, what do you think my number one is?
I have no idea. I'll throw a guess out there. I know I'm going to be wrong, but it wouldn't be The Watchmen, would it?
Nope, it's not The Watchmen.
Okay, what is it?
So I did a lot of thinking about this, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought I have to put the movie at number one that deserves to be there, and that is, I call it the original Batman. Tim Burton, Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson from 1989. And the more I read about this film and the more I remembered my own feelings about it, the more I knew this has to be the best superhero movie of all time. Having witnessed his parents' brutal murder as a child, millionaire philanthropist Bruce Wayne fights crime in Gotham City disguised as Batman, a costume hero who strikes fear into the hearts of villains. But when a deformed madman who calls himself the Joker seizes control of Gotham's criminal underworld, Batman must face his most ruthless nemesis ever while protecting both his identity and his love interest, reporter Vicky Vale. This stars Michael Keaton as Batman and Bruce Wayne, Jack Nicholson as Jack Napier and the Joker, Kim Basinger as Vicky Vale, Robert Wuhl as Alexander Knox, Billy D. Williams, Lando, as Harvey Dent, and Michael Gough as Alfred. And you can't forget Jack Palance as Carl Grissom, who's just a fun actor. Everything is so breathy and pronounced.
Believe it or not.
Believe it or not. It was directed by Tim Burton, composed by Danny Elfman and Prince. You can't not... there is so much about this movie, you just can't put anything else at number one. It's such an odd combination of Tim Burton, Prince, Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson, Danny Elfman. And then you talk about historically, before this was the superhero movie that changed superhero movies, because before this, everything was campy. It was very safe. Batman, they tried to make it different, and they went through such a hard time even getting this movie made and coming up with something that would work, because when comic book fans found out that Michael Keaton was going to play Batman, they revolted, and they sent over 50,000 letters to Warner Brothers telling them they were making a mistake, not only with Michael Keaton, but with Tim Burton. Because as far as comic book fans were concerned, this is going to be Pee-wee's Big Adventure meets Beetlejuice. Mm-hmm. So the amount of negativity towards this movie was astounding. Christopher Nolan never had to deal with this kind of stuff. Maybe a little bit with Heath Ledger as the Joker, but not at all on the same scale as when they're trying to make this Batman film. This Batman film introduced the first real cool Batmobile. You know, everything Christopher Nolan did, you can say, well, he took what Tim Burton did and he just gave it his own twist. And the more I thought about that, the more I realized I cannot put The Dark Knight above this movie on my list. I can't. Michael Keaton invented the deep voice. That was his idea.
That's true.
Today, when everyone says, I'm Batman, they owe Michael Keaton that. He's the guy. It wasn't Tim Burton. It wasn't Doc Kane. It was Michael Keaton that came up with that idea to make, because he was saying, he was trying to figure out, how can I make Bruce Wayne and Batman sound different. How are people going to not know Batman is Bruce Wayne? And he said, I know, I'm going to make my voice a lower register. How can you not put this movie at number one when you think about all those things that went on? And I'm just getting started. One of the funny... All right,
let me chime in here. Let me add, because I'm sure you have more, but I definitely
have more.
So I will actually. I'm going to make an adjustment here because I didn't have it on my list, but now that you've brought this up, and the more I'm now thinking about the time in my life when this did come out, I'm going to put this in my honorable mention. I didn't have it in my honorable mention. I'm not going to change my other list because I'm fine with how that is, but I'm going to put this in now as at least my honorable mention because for the reasons you described, it definitely was a transition, a transformative approach to the superhero movies. And I wouldn't say the movie itself was as great impactfully as everything else that surrounded it. And maybe that's why I didn't put it on the top of the list, because this was not a perfect movie. But there were so many things I loved about it. I did love the cool, dark aspect of it, the vehicles, we never seen anything like that. Of course, Nicholson as the Joker and Prince doing the soundtrack was definitely cool and that does bring me back to the summer of 1989, because so many things happened in that summer that brings me back to things that surrounded that movie. I remember my first serious girlfriend, we went to go see this movie at a drive-in, actually, with my buddy Pat, who I go with the games with, football games with. It was like a double date. And that kind of started things off. I just remember that. And then, of course, listening to the Prince soundtrack all summer long because of the tie into the movie. And, of course, even today, we still repeat lines from that. Batman, stop. Mm-hmm. And I remember even my buddy Dino, when he was first starting to date his now wife, we were playing a game of Taboo, I think. And Dino and I were on the same team, and the word was Batman. And most people, to have them guess the word, they'd say, Robin, winged superhero, stuff like that. And all I did was go, who are you? And Dino immediately got Batman. So in like a second, we got this thing nailed. But again, that was the whole power of the way Michael Keaton definitely created that sound for that voice, which they carried on into the current Batman, which still does the low gravelly voice, which we love to make fun of. So a lot of cool things. So now that you brought that up, I'm revising my list and I'm putting it on there, not as a top 5, but in my honorable mention, because it does represent not just impact in cinema, but for me personally, a time of my life that a lot was going on that movie had a wraparound in. So thank you for shedding light. I changed my list there.
All right. Well, I was just getting started, so may I continue?
Continue.
A funny little tidbit. I have to share this, but at one point, Yvonne Reitman was going to direct this movie, and he wanted Bill Murray to play Batman and Eddie Murphy to be Robin. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
That's just...
It'd be Ghostbusters in a Batman outfit.
I think the point is clear, though. Imagine that kind of a movie. It's just another comedy.
Right.
There's nothing changing about the way superhero movies are looked at. There's, because the early Batman, the movie, that was all campy comedy. There hadn't really been a serious take on a superhero yet. Mm-hmm. I mean, Superman was not a serious take. That was a pretty by the numbers approach to movie making, I think, at the time.
But Superman got campier and worse after the first one. It was like second one was worse, third was worser, and the fourth one, God, that one is just, that's what was that Superman 4? The
Quest for Peace.
Quest for Peace, the Quest for Quest for ridiculous destruction of Christopher Reeve's career. Anyway, so it only got worse after that first Superman. So since then, you're right. There was really no good takes on superheroes up until that point.
I did a lot of comparing in my mind to The Dark Knight, because I like The Dark Knight a lot. But the more I thought about it, I thought Christopher Nolan had it too easy compared to Tim Burton. And I liked Hans Zimmer's score in The Dark Knight, but when I think about Hans Zimmer versus Danny Elfman, Danny Elfman came up with a theme, just like you talk about John Williams and your love of his Superman theme. I mean, the Batman theme. Dun, 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 dun. You know, right there. I mean, tell me the theme from The Dark Knight. What's Hans Zimmer's theme from The Dark Knight? It's not really. It's just a lot of. Wah,
yeah, right.
Wah. True. But there's no theme. It's just not. So again, I like The Dark Knight, but I got to give more credit to Batman. And also in history, Batman had another place in history. I don't know if you remember this, Norb. I don't think a lot of people remember this. I remember it clear as day, and I think it was because it was during a time when home video rentals were huge, because everybody was renting videotapes to watch movies at home. And why did we rent them? Because they cost too much to buy.
Yeah.
A VHS movie to purchase was around $100. I remember looking at the movie rotating case at the grocery store in Sela and seeing Star Wars for $110.
I remember that, yeah.
It's just,
VHS
it's like
quality.
Unobtainable. I mean, only the elite could afford that. So when Batman was released on home video, Warner Brothers decided to come out of nowhere and make it $24.95.
Oh,
and they were selling it at pharmacy drugstores. They were selling it everywhere. And everyone was buying it because it was the first time you could buy a movie that was actually affordable. I bought it.
Yeah.
Because I like the idea of owning a movie. It was fun to have a movie on videotape that you could watch whenever you wanted, because the rental, you only got to keep it for the weekend or an overnight. So Batman made history not only in the theater, but in its home video release. It changed everything. After that, the price came down on movies you could purchase, and it created the market where you could, for the first time, own a movie by the mainstream.
That's true. Up to that point, I didn't own any movies either. I just illegally copied them from Betamax to VHS or VHS to Betamax. Yeah. So we had all hand-labeled movies on the
that's right.
on the edge. But yeah, that's right. That did change.
So. Again, I have nothing but respect for Michael Keaton overcoming a lot of negativity against him to create a superhero character that was a staple for characters to come. And even Christian Bale said he took Michael Keaton's idea of the lower voice and used it in his own character. He homages Michael Keaton. Says, you did it, I'm going to take what you did and use it in my character. I can't put The Dark Knight at number one when The Dark Knight really came out of this movie.
I think for me, as I said earlier, you give props for all the things, all the barriers that it broke to do what it did at the time. From like everything you said, from the video to the soundtrack to the negative press before the movie came out. But then there's the actual movie itself. And even at the time that came out, it was good. It was entertaining. It had good scenes, but there was some things that I remember even at the time didn't think were great in terms of cinematic movie storytelling. You know, like the Vicky Vale character. I remember at one point she said, "Are we going to really try to love each other?" And I thought, where'd this come from? We got like zero chemistry in here. So I didn't really buy the Vicky Vale relationship. So
okay, I'm gonna interrupt you real quick though.
All right.
I'm gonna interrupt you and argue with you on that. You remembered a line that Vicky Vale said from the movie. Tell me a line that Maggie Gyllenhaal's character said from The Dark Knight that was memorable. More memorable than that.
I can't remember one.
Exactly. That's my point. You can't even remember Maggie Gyllenhaal in The Dark Knight.
Okay, but here's the
unmemorable.
thing. But here's the thing. The only reason I remember that, it's in the soundtrack. So when you listen to the Bat Dance song, it's sampled in. So I didn't remember it from the movie. I remembered it from Prince's album. So, but my point is, I remember when it did happen in the movie, I was like, where did this relationship come from? There's not even really a relationship happening here. It's an awkward sort of, they know each other and all of a sudden she's talking about loving each other. So I didn't buy into the relationship in the movie. I just remember the line from the soundtrack. Okay. So that was one thing I didn't like. There's not the best chemistry in the world. Probably the main thing. I guess that jumps out as probably the main thing that I would have complained. I'm trying to think of number two, and I hadn't really prepared for that. But that one jumps out as the first thing I would probably argue about. But my point is, cinematically, everything you've brought up has been things other than the actual cinema storytelling of the film. You've talked about, like the voice, you talked about things that were created, what they broke, what they started, what they had going against them, but you haven't actually talked about that this is just a great film.
Would you like me
to? Go ahead, because I probably disagree with you on that part of it.
So, Jack Nicholson created a very, very memorable Joker. So many great lines in that movie. This is the way he talks and says things. And I really liked, I can think of so many moments in that movie that I enjoyed. Subtle things when I think about the Joker character, because it does seem like when you talk about a Batman movie that it is about the Joker. And the scene in the museum where Vicky Vale is supposed to meet someone and she's waiting, and then all of a sudden this smoke starts coming in the museum and then everybody passes out, and then Party Man from Prince starts playing, and the Joker and his henchmen come in, and he's painting these paintings with, he calls himself a homicidal artist, and he's defacing all these famous paintings. And then he sits down and he starts talking to Vicky Vale. He says, I am the first fully functioning homicidal artist. And then he says, so tell me, what do you know about? And he goes, this is his mime version of Batman, fluttering his bat wings. And I love those little moments.
Yeah, he was great.
You probably forgot about that.
I forgot that specifically. I did not forget the impact that Jack Nicholson had as the character. Like I said before, Heath Ledger's performance, Jack Nicholson's, was regarded as the best Joker. Not that we had so many to go off of, but certainly his was stood above as the best at that time until Heath Ledger's version came out. But I always loved the fact that Nicholson was in there. To me, it was the highlight, personality-wise, character-wise. And I think I read somewhere that he endorsed the fact that he wanted Prince to be the one doing the soundtrack. So to me, that was like extra good stars for my liking of Jack Nicholson in that film. But yes, I will not discount that he was great in the film, for sure.
Well, what did you think of, let's talk about the Batmobile. That was a big part of the movie. That was the first time they had a cool-looking, dark Batmobile, because the Batmobile from the previous movie was a cheesy-looking, high gloss, bright color, blue painted car.
You're talking about the Burt Ward, Adam West days.
Yeah. That was the Batmobile.
I take a little offense that you called it that, because I thought that car was cool back then. It had like flames coming out the back, and I actually owned the Batmobile car as an action figure toy thing. I think I had a Batman doll and the car. So I had a very strong affinity towards the original Batmobile. I thought it was really cool.
Why isn't Batman the movie in your top 5 list then?
No, I'm talking about the TV series.
Oh, okay, but there's Batman the movie, which is based on the TV series. That's with Adam West and Burt Ward. Did you ever see Batman the movie?
I don't know if I ever saw it, actually.
Oh, okay.
I just like the car. All I'm saying, I'm not putting them on a pedestal. I'm just saying that car was cool in my book. But yes, Tim Burton made it cooler. I will not argue that. All the vehicles that were revealed in the Batman series after Keaton took over, they all kind of had that very cool, modern, almost like armor-plated vehicle look. I give you that one. That is good. I'm not knocking that. It's included on those things they did well and created that was sort of something different. I'm cool with that.
Well, going further into the movie, I would get into Michael Keaton as Batman. He was the surprise. He was an interesting Bruce Wayne. The reason Tim Burton wanted him is because he liked working with him in Beetlejuice, but he liked his performance in Clean and Sober, which is, I think, a movie a lot of people haven't seen because everyone just thought of Michael Keaton as the comedian. But he played a perfectly fine, serious Bruce Wayne. And I loved Prince's song. I thought it was so cool how he did such different types of songs within a Danny Elfman score. I liked the way that worked. I liked the parade scene. It was so different. Tim Burton added this creative, bizarre, artistic touch to the movie that only an artist like he could. And that gave the movie its own personality as well, to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the Prince touch to it. I'm already a self-proclaimed Prince fan, so I was going to love it anyway. But yeah, Party Man, I think that song definitely is probably one of the top ones of my favorite in there. Of course, Bat Dance. Mm-hmm. Bat Dance. Great song. And then it breaks out into a little funky little thing in the middle. Vicky Vale. Great song. It brings me back to 1989 summer. I even like the love ballad from that song. The Arms of Orion. I don't even know if you remember that song, but it was the love ballad, which I don't even think you hear maybe until the end credits or something. But I listened to that song and I liked it too. The Arms of Orion, that's where I want to be, with Sheena Easton. Again, brings me back to my first girlfriend in the summer of '89. So a lot of memories to that song. I'm with you. That's why I'm putting it back on my list, because I do feel now, after rethinking it, the impact of that movie, the time it came out, and the tie-in to what was going on in my life, definitely had a much greater impact than probably any other film that maybe Superman had. But cinematically, I don't hold it as high with the rest of what it did, I guess is the thing. So in terms of I just remember feeling like at the very end, it felt a little bit anticlimactic. I can't get into specifics why, but it's movie-wise, it's not completely satisfying to where I can go, oh, this is like cinematic perfection. It did a lot of other things great, but I just don't give it that final thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think I know how this could have ended up being in Norb's number one if the one thing would have happened that didn't is... In my research, it was determined they wanted Michael Jackson to do the love songs, but they couldn't get it.
For real?
Yep.
Really?
Yes.
That would have been a first to have Michael Jackson and Prince collaborating on an album together. I didn't hear about that. I didn't know about that.
So if that had happened, it probably would have been your number one.
It would have definitely had an effect. I bought the album anyway, so no matter what, I was buying that soundtrack. And Michael Jackson was on there. Yeah, it would have been pretty cool. But I don't know. I mean, we're talking about different things. The soundtrack of an album is a whole different discussion. The props and things and the characters. But then there's just the overall, how did it go from first act, second act to third act? And I don't know. I guess still the third act, I remember feeling not as satisfied as I wanted to be. That's kind of where it felt a little bit short.
When's the last time you saw that movie?
Long time ago.
See, and I think right there you need to see it again. And I've watched this movie often over the years. I watched it last year. And I think what's tricky is sometimes when you put together a list, it's almost like, well, what's in your brain?
Out of sight, out of mind, right?
And I think this Batman movie is out of sight, out of mind for a lot of people. I think if you ask people, what's the best Batman movie? They're all going to say The Dark Knight, because that's just the one they remember. The Tim Burton one is just, it's older. You have to, a lot of people have just forgotten it. And so I haven't. And I am very proud to have it as number one. And I will argue with anyone as to why I think it deserves it more than The Dark Knight.
Well, there are holes to your recent memory argument, because they've done other Batman movies since The Dark Knight, because Dark Knight came out 12 years ago.
Oh, they got one they're making right now.
I know. My memory is very fresh of what they come out with, and I will quickly say those recent ones have not overtaken, because those are some crap things that they've done in some of those movies are not anywhere as close as... I'm still going to put Dark Knight ahead of Batman from 1989. But those two would be, I'd still put those two together. I wouldn't be close with the other ones that they put out lately. Just not even, the fact that even though they came out within the last decade, quality-wise, from a film standpoint, can't even hold a candle. But you convinced me, because I had sort of forgotten some of the other impacts of other things with that movie. But I will hold firm to where I feel in terms of, as a movie itself, in terms of the collective analysis of a movie from Act 1, Act 2 to Act 3 and the resolution, that I would still put Dark Knight above the first Batman. Because I loved the movie and all the stuff that came out, but I remember also at the time thinking that this isn't like the best movie I've ever seen. There was definitely some things I didn't think that were that great. They're still better than the other sequels that came after that. Was it Batman? What was the second one? That was only the second one came out with that Keaton did, right? With the Penguin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was that second one called? Batman 2 something?
I think it was Batman
Returns.
Batman Returns. Yeah.
But then that's when they get ridiculous after that. Then they had Val Kilmer and
That was
Batman
terrible.
Forever. Then
George Clooney.
Then George Clooney with the butt shot. I mean, at that point, it was like, oh, God, what are you guys doing?
No, then they brought in Batgirl and Robin. And
Yeah,
then
Catwoman movie.
And it got bad.
Yeah, it just bad. So, yeah. So when you compare to everything that followed, and Batman, when before Dark Knight, we haven't even talked about the relaunch with what's the guy's name again? What's the new Batman again? Who was in the Dark Knight?
Ben Affleck?
No. The one that movie Christian Bale. Sorry, Christian Bale. Before, we haven't even talked about that Batman, where that ranks. And that one was pretty good. And I think a lot of it's relative to the crap that came out after, the first Batman of 1989. That was a much better movie as a whole because it got so bad. But I still would put, Dark Knight and then Batman.
Well, Prince just rolled over in his grave.
Hey, I never said anything bad about the soundtrack. The soundtrack is still up there, so I'm okay with that. So I will watch it again and give it another look, though, because there's been a lot of Batman since I've seen the 1989.
Make sure you watch it with your girls and say, hey, I want to show you a movie from the olden days, girls.
I wonder how they'd react to it. Yeah. But I don't think it's going to change my mind. I will look at it again sometime, and I'll let you know.
Well, just remember, your number one is only there because of this movie. So just remember that. Without this movie, there would be no Nolan Batman.
Well, at least that version would be different because there'd be certain things that clearly Tim Burton's Batman did before them. And I won't argue that. I'll give you credit there. On your point.
All right.
So I guess only this left is you have an honorable mention left.
I do have an honorable mention.
Mine.
I guess you made your honorable mention.
I'll say what I was going to do. I was sort of bouncing because in our top, a few episodes ago, we did our top movies from 2010 to 2020. And I actually had Deadpool in there, but I didn't want to bring it again because I already felt like I already put it on my list. I'm not going to include it on another top 5. But so I got to mention that one. And then I was going to mention The Watchmen. We Are the Watchmen, but I loved when The Watchmen came out. That's one I feel like a lot of people don't talk about a lot. I don't want to get too deep into it, but I really enjoyed that one. It was dark, but it had a really cool open. The Watchmen superhero movie had a really cool open, and that alone I'd like to rewatch just to see that part again. But that did have a big influence on how we created our show and the title design. So there's a little bit of lasting impact from that superhero movie, The Watchmen.
Well, I liked the Watchmen film, but I also was unhappy with the ending in it because I had read the comic book and they changed up the ending in a way I didn't like. So that was a mark for me.
You were tainted by too much knowledge.
So,
all right, so go to your honorable mention.
Well, I expect you to like my honorable mention, and it's one that you have seen thanks to me. But it is a movie from 2012 called Dredd. Now, I didn't say Judge Dredd. I said Dredd.
If you said Judge Dredd, I would have had an argument with you.
Mega City 1 is a vast, violent metropolis where felons rule the streets. The only law lies with cops called judges, who act as judge, jury, and executioner. And Dredd, played by Carl Urban, is one of the city's most feared. One day, Dredd is partnered with Cassandra, a rookie with powerful psychic abilities. A report of a terrible crime sends Dredd and Cassandra to a dangerous area of town controlled by Mama, who's played by Lena Headey, who we all know from Game of Thrones. She is a ruthless drug lord who will stop at nothing to protect her empire. This is directed by Pete Travis. It was shot in real 3D, and they incorporated a use of super duper slow-mo visual effects shots, which made for some really, really cool little moments in the film. Sadly, this movie was a box office failure, and Carl Urban is quoted as saying it really should have been a marketing failure. He feels this movie was terribly marketed because nobody knew about it when it came out. I knew about it because I wanted to see it, and I even liked the Stallone Judge Dredd movie. You know, not as much as this one. By all means, this one was way better. But this movie was rated R. It was very, very violent, and it had super awesome action. And I remember kind of case in point to Carl Urban talking about the marketing failure, even you didn't know about this movie. I had to show it to you and Rob at your house and say, you guys have got to see this. It has everything you like in a violent action film. And I remember the first scene where this guy gets hit by a car, you and Rob both go, oh! And I remember right then I kind of subtly smiled to myself and thought, yep. Now they're finally going to understand why this is so good. And
I think I agree with you. This is a very underrated, overlooked movie, which I'm glad you did bring to my attention because I loved it. It was it had sort of the slow-mo artistic nature of like the movie 300, where they took graphic violence and kind of made it a little almost a slow motion dance with blood and things like that. But very, very violent. But I think part of it was, if I did ever run across it, the first Judge Dredd was bad. It had Sylvester Stallone and what's her name from Speed?
Sandra Bullock. And it was dumb. It was a bad movie. And I remember the only thing cool about the first Judge Dredd is we actually saw Sylvester Stallone in person because they did a premiere at the Renton Cinemas, and we saw him walking up and entering the theater, and it was like, oh my God, it's Sylvester Stallone. So that's the only cool thing about that movie. But the movie itself was kind of a joke and a big letdown. Wesley Snipes, I think, was in that too, right? Actually, I feel like I got to correct you a little bit. It wasn't a premiere. It was a test screening. And you and Rob didn't get to see it because you were too late.
We were
so
late.
You got to see Stallone leave the theater when you drove up, and you didn't get to see it.
Yeah.
So
okay, thank you for the correction. Yes, it was not. It was a test screening because a lot of the effect shots were missing. But we were late. But it's still, my memory's right in that.
No, you guys didn't get to see it though. Instead, you went in and watched Casper.
Yeah. Good memory on that. But my memory of Judge Dredd, the first one, was just seeing him. I did eventually see the movie, and the movie was not very good. So, it was just cool to see Sylvester Stallone actually in person walking in this place. I never thought to see him coming out. But yeah, it was a test thing, and they had a lot of effect shots that weren't done.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the memory is better than the movie. The movie was pretty lame. So even if I'd seen the Dredd ads, I probably would have thought, why are they making a remake of a movie that wasn't even very good? So I'm sure that probably maybe affected it, but it was better than the first one and had its own style. Loved the violence, loved the action. The premise was pretty cool, and if you liked lots of cool gun stuff, I remember at one point they bust out with some really huge chain gun that would take out an entire floor of an apartment building. Yeah. I remember that. I was like, oh my gosh, this gun is off the charts. So it was cool. And I remember the very ending was satisfying too. Graphically, as well as just sort of the way they wrapped everything up. So, yeah, I love this movie. And I think I've only seen it the one time with you guys, but I own it. I got a copy of it. But it's very, very good. You guys should go see it if you like that sort of thing, if you can stomach some violence.
Okay, I'm out.
We agree to agree on that last one.
Yeah, not much arguing there. So I do have a surprise, and this is along the lines of my number one film. Being the Lego collector I am, I thought I would show you that Lego has now a limited edition of the Batmobile from the first Batman movie with Michael Keaton. So
nice.
This is a 366 pieces. It's a small replica of the car, but the surprise is, the way you got this is you had to buy the big one.
What?
So this is the real Batmobile. I just thought I'd kind of just tease you there with that little mini version. So Lego came out last year with the original Batmobile from the first, I guess, I don't want to say first Batman film because Batman the movie was the first, but from the first, I guess, new generation of the darker Batman version of the films. So
the 1989 Tim Burton Batman.
Yep. And they've done the Tumbler. They call it, the Batmobile from the Christian Bale version is called the Tumbler. And Lego did do the Tumbler as well, which I have.
Between the two, I actually like that one better. The other one, the Tumbler, I guess, there's just it's like a lot of tires.
Yeah.
I think the Batman stop, that one that you have there is actually, I think, a cooler car. It just looks more like a car than the other one's like a lot of tires. Mostly big tires and stuff, at least in my memory of it right now. But that's cool. Mr. Lego guy. I mean, I figured if there'd be one to be had out there, it's not surprised you would own that one.
Yep.
It's pretty cool. You never built it though, right?
Not yet.
It's just sitting in the box.
Yep. But I plan to.
All right. As soon as you finish that Millennium Falcon.
As soon as I finish the Millennium Falcon.
How's that Falcon coming along anyway? You started
Good.
about 2 weeks ago, right?
Yep. We've worked on it most every day, like a few days taken off, but about an hour a day. And I'd say we're probably 20% done. So it's,
pretty good.
at this point, it's still the base. So you're building the landing gear and the structure. So there's not really the ship part yet. It's you're building the foundation. So, but we're both enjoying it. We each take turns. He takes a page, I take a page, and it's coming along nicely.
So you expect to be done by July?
Probably.
Sooner?
Yeah, probably been done by July. We're not rushing it, but
No.
I think by July we'll be done.
That'll be cool to see.
Maybe I'll try to hold it up on the show. It's big, though. It's a big Millennium Falcon. I don't know if I can. but-
That'd be a big, I may not fit on the screen. But
Oh, I have to mention to you, Norb, you know what I saw in the news today? We were talking about musical films last week, and I was telling you about, asking you the question, would they make Hamilton into a feature film? Well, the big news this morning is they are going to release Hamilton from the Broadway performance of 2016 on Disney Plus July 1st.
Oh, so it's not going to be a movie. It's just a recording of the stage performance?
Yeah, they're
that's even
releasing
better.
with when Lin-Manuel Miranda played Hamilton, so it's starring him.
right.
So we can actually do it'll be fun.
Review.
We can do a review show on that.
Since I've never seen it, and when I do, it'll be the first time. And I can't wait. If you like to know that this thing everyone's talked about, I know nothing about. So I haven't heard the sound. I haven't looked up the soundtrack. I figure when I'm going to watch it, I want to watch it everything, songs, visuals for the first time, and not have sort of a teaser, listen, and then watch the show. I want it all to be fresh. So that's great. That's cool. Good to know.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks again for watching our top 5 superhero movies. Again, before we sign off, I just want to thank you again for those of you who are watching us on YouTube. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, comment, hit that notification bell. And for everybody listening on the podcast, thank you for doing so and hanging out with us for this long show. And the fact that you're listening right now means you must like us enough to want to hear us banter about crazy stuff from the 80s and beyond. So we do appreciate you and hope you will continue to do so. I'm Norb.
And I'm Mike.
And we are The Watchmen.
Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for watching The Watchmen.
Please click on here to watch other episodes, and be sure to hit that like button too.
And please subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll always be alerted to any future episodes.
It really helps us out, and we appreciate it.
We'll see you next time. And remember, we'll be watching.